wonderful webinar. I see one name, Kathy Barnes. Thank you, Kathy Barnes. I'd like to see more, but maybe it's me. Okay.
There they go. They're coming.
From
Yes.
California. And there is Kathy from Connecticut. Hello, Becky Wright. Good evening. Mary Lee Howard from my state, Morris Women's Club. Thank you, Mary Lee. Shirley Holly, president of New Jersey. It's good to see your name on there. And always Teresa Rutter from GFWC, Colorado. Candace Hill from the Holden Beach Women's Club in North Carolina. And we have Sandra from the Women's Club of Colorado Springs. Thank you, Sandra, for joining us this evening. And Maureen from Virginia Beach. Oh my goodness, Sharon, they're coming in quite quickly, aren't they?
Yeah, Florida's in the leads. There they go. Come on. There we go.
Oh, and
Look,
there's
another Florida. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a lot of great members from the state of Florida. That's wonderful. Annette from California. And the list keeps coming in. Eva from North Carolina. Oh, goodness. Sherry from, Clearwater, Florida as well.
There's a Pat Webb from the Coast Guard Auxiliary member.
Yeah, Coast Guard Auxiliary. I see that. Yeah, Pat Webb. Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Oh, wonderful. This is great. Oh, there's those girls with the mother-daughter team from Florida. Jenna and Anita. Is that
Anita.
Right?
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, Sheila from California. Good to see you on there. Christine from Connecticut. Oh, Jenna's laughing at me. She does the LOL. Okay. Well, anyway, it's getting to be 7 o'clock. I think we'll let this go for about a minute, and then we will start our webinar for this evening.
We're halfway there. We have over 50 already coming on, so that's wonderful. We're excited that you all are joining us this evening.
And I am so happy that you're able to monitor that number, Sharon. That's wonderful. So, there's Sally from New Mexico. Hello, Sally. That's a great state. And Debbie Ferrari from Connecticut. And there's our president-elect, Sue Ellen Brazil from Alabama. Thank you, Sue Ellen, for joining us this evening. And I think we'll go one more minute, and you let me know when we get to about 70. Are we at 70 yet?
We're at 57, so they're coming in.
Yep. Well, wait for 65. Okay, this sounds like an auction all of a sudden. Okay. Well, anyway, ladies. Oh, there's Martha from Massachusetts. It's good to see your name, Martha. Haven't talked to you in a long time. And of course, Jolie has said, welcome, Tampa. So that's wonderful, too. Well, thank you all for taking an hour out of your evening tonight. And I know you all know, but I would like to say it just in case we do have some guests, which I believe we do with us. It's me, GFWC International President, Deb Strahanowski. And it makes me so happy to see so many of you wanting to learn more about our new civic engagement and outreach initiative. I have the pleasure this evening to introduce the GFWC Civic Engagement and Outreach Chairman, Sharon Oliphant. Sharon, it's good to see you tonight. I'm so glad you were having this opportunity to have this webinar. And I'm going to ask you if you would be so kind to introduce our panelists for this evening, or our first panelist for this evening. So thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, President Deb. It is such an honor tonight to have so many wonderful people here that's going to tell us about our new initiative. And it is my privilege to introduce you to Susan J. Curtin. She is a partner in Power Family Enterprises and the president of the Kinrose Kitchen Table Foundation, the private family foundation of the J.D. Power family. In addition to her role as chair of the board for the National Coast Guard Museum Association, she has served on several other boards and committees, including the Heart Center at Boston Children's Hospital, the College of Holy Cross, and Mascoff. Susan served as a third-class petty officer, port security in the Coast Guard Reserve for 4 years while earning her bachelor's degree at Holy Cross. And she has an extensive background in corporate sales, marketing, and nonprofit management. Most recently, she was awarded the United States Coast Guard Distinguished Public Service Award for her tireless efforts in supporting the service and the effort to build the National Coast Guard Museum. Let's please welcome Susan J. Curtin.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I can't thank you enough for all the participation and for welcoming me and my team and the National Coast Guard Museum Association. I've been involved in this project. What I thought was going to be a short little stint back in 2015 when my kids were in middle school has really snowballed into one of the greatest projects I've ever been involved with, and it's been a real honor to lead this effort. It hasn't been the easiest project to get off the ground, but we are pleased to let you all know that we are nearing our goal of our private fundraising, $50 million for a total project cost of $150 million, which you're going to hear more about as our team jumps in. But I just wanted to open up and first say, how I got involved in this and why it's been so important and why we feel this partnership with your organization is going to be really crucial to us finishing off our fundraising goals. So I got involved back in early 2012 when my father was originally uncovered by the Coast Guard. There's a little funny story behind that where the U.S. Navy Memorial honored him with the Lone Sailor Award, and that's where we met the current Commandant of the Coast Guard, who had mentioned that they were trying to get a national museum off the ground. It's the only service without a national museum, which is really hard to believe. The Navy, the Marines, the Army, and the Air Force have all had an established national museum for years. And my father and I, having both served in the Coast Guard, we've always been proud of that service. It was both in very different ways, both very transformational for the two of us in our lives, and we equate a lot of our family success. My dad certainly, having never been on a ship before or never passed the New York border after growing up in Worcester, Massachusetts, would have never been able to see the world that was out there without his service in the Coast Guard. And we really felt like this project, when it was first introduced to us, could really give the Coast Guard the recognition that it truly deserves. It's probably the most under-recognized military service in our country, and yet it has such a humanitarian mission, and people don't realize day in, day out what the Coast Guard does for them. So, like I said, I came on the board in 2015, and we, along with Captain Pulver, we were able to right the ship, so to speak, in getting this project off the ground. And so far, we are putting steel in the ground and starting to construct the building in downtown New London. I think after learning a lot more about your organization, I was really, really inspired to learn about the history. And what really struck me with the work that you do is my father and I both served in the Coast Guard, but it was really my mother, through her civic engagement and her volunteerism, much like all the work you do around the country. That's what really gave me the inspiration to really learn more about what you're doing and help understand your mission and hope that we could collaborate. So we are so thankful for your time and consideration while we present to you the future National Coast Guard Museum. So thank you for having us. I think we're going to introduce Wes Pulver, Captain Wes Pulver at this time.
Okay, wonderful. Madam Chair, thank you very much. I just want to say thanks again. And actually, I was hoping, can you go back to that slide one before? Just a little fun tidbit about this slide. Not only is my dear friend, the upper left-hand corner, Linda Fagan, the first female service chief, but a dear friend of Sue and I, and served with her for many years. But if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's a picture of someone taking a fix off of St. George's up in Newfoundland, and that is actually Sue's dad. So we snuck that picture in for Sue. So that's JD Power when he was Lieutenant Junior Grade Dave Power on the East Wind. So I thought that's really a cool picture, and I thought worth highlighting. And really that's kind of what we're trying to do, is really highlight some of those stories the Coast Guard has. As Sue said, a humanitarian service, a military service, an environmental service. Folks just don't know what the Coast Guard does. And I think by telling the story, it's going to allow, hopefully, to inspire a new generation. Hopefully it shows the Coast Guard itself can use it as a platform to tell its story. So we consider this more than a museum. As Sue mentioned, we came on together in 2015, really got things going in 2018. And right now we're sitting at, of our $150 million capital campaign, we're over 145 million. We're going to let a bid out for the museum itself, the building itself here shortly. So we're real excited about where we are, and just really excited for the engagement with the GFWC. It really just means a lot that you've invited us into your family as you have. Next slide, please. So the National Coast Guard Museum, as Sue mentioned, and it's going to be in New London, Connecticut. And New London, Connecticut is a small city. It's more of a small town in eastern side of Connecticut on the water on a very deep river. And it's going to be the future home of the National Coast Guard Museum. It's one of the original 10 ports of the U.S. Coast Guard dating back in 1791. So the Coast Guard started in 1790, 1791. The Coast Guard has a revenue marine cutter just to the left of where the family is on the pier. And it was stationed there for 10 years. And it really started our wonderful service many, many years ago. We've been asked to both design the building, build the building, fundraise to the building. And then in addition to that, we've been part of how we're going to tell the story. The beautiful part about this project is once we get the building up, the Coast Guard installs its storytelling, the actual Coast Guard takes lead on the museum. So it's going to be a federally funded museum, just like the Smithsonian, like the other services have, so that it's free to the public. Folks can come. We're on a rail line, so the hundreds of thousands of people that get in off of Amtrak or Shoreline East, the Metro, can just come right into the museum. We're right alongside a ferry terminal where 2.5 million people come, and we're within a stone's throw of Route 95, and obviously the corridor halfway between New York City and Boston. So it really is an exciting place to build. At the same time, it's that small town, which is sort of a Coast Guard thing. We're in a lot of cities, but we're really known for what we do in the small towns around the country, and we can't wait to tell that story. The building itself, you can see there, it's actually 5 stories of exhibits, a 6-story building. It's about 85,000 square feet. This is the actual design of the building. So you can see this is from the city looking down on it. What you see from this angle is a pedestrian bridge from parking garage over the railroad tracks. It's right there. If you look over the upper right-hand corner, you can see the mast of the Coast Guard Bark Eagle. It's tall ship that trains cadets in the future of our service. And then the museum itself. Some of the really cool things on this museum, if you look to the right, that's a glass atrium. It's 5 stories high, and that is a Sikorsky 60 Jayhawk helicopter. So for those who have seen the stories of rescues in Katrina or offshore in the storms during Superstorm Sandy, when they rescued the Bounty crew, that was the helicopter that did it. And we're going to have that helicopter. So it gives you an idea of the size of this museum, that we've actually built a Sikorsky helicopter into about 10-20% of the museum. So we're real excited about what this platform can give for the Coast Guard. Next slide, please. And again, to get an understanding of just the scope of the building, and again, you look upper left, there's a Sikorsky helicopter. You start seeing that platform. You see how we're engaging the waterfront. So there's garage doors, big glass garage doors. You can just walk in and out of the museum into downtown New London, into the waterfront there. And you can see, again, this is the design that's going to bid. So Chair Curtin, we're still going to go public next Monday on that bid. And we are just so thrilled to put this project out to bid. But you can see the scope of this building.
Wes, before we advance slides here, just there are a couple of members who have bought pavers and wanted to highlight that piece of the museum in this picture right here.
Sure. So what we've done, and we'll get into a little of how you can support. For those who have supported, we're going to say thank you. And you can see they have a design. So everything is designed by Payetta Architect. It's a high-end architect. They do a lot of work on the water, a lot of work with glass. You might see some of that here. But one of the things they also designed for us was the opportunity for folks to be recognized. You'll see in the atrium itself, we have a wall of philanthropy, which is just really extraordinary. But on the waterfront here, you can see the pattern. And the idea is it's a denser It's denser towards the building and lighter to the water, but those are pavers. So the Pulver family's got a paver. Some of the folks on line GFWC have pavers. It's just a great opportunity to be recognized. The pavers at a lower level than, say, the wall philanthropy. Next slide. So I mentioned already that Sikorsky helicopter. So that's the iconic image. Now, I served in the Coast Guard for just a few years. I was about 28 and a half with half at sea. And so someone who drove ships for a living, I look at this, and this is the iconic image of the Coast Guard. It's my aviator brother and friends that are flying helicopters and while I'm out in the heavy seas. But it's just heroic what they do. And what we've done is we have this Sikorsky Jayhawk helicopter. And again, Lockheed Martin is also a huge donor, so we love having Sikorsky and the helicopter in there. But what you can see from there is the rescue swimmer, that iconic image above Katrina of pulling that family off the roof, or that iconic image of pulling someone from safety. And you get a good view of what this museum is. Beautiful atrium, engaging the water. You can see the different angles on the water side. It's supposed to look like sails. We got a lot of flexibility and artistic license to build what we think will be an absolutely stunning building and an iconic building. So when I bring my granddaughter in there and she looks up, she'll never forget what she sees. And that's part of the measurement for me, is how much my grandkids love this building. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do now is just talk about the storylines. Coast Guard's been around since 1791. It's fought in every single war. It's been in a law enforcement agency from the days of Alexander Hamilton. It's been a protectors of the environment, responding to marine safety. The Exxon Valdez oil spill was the Coast Guard had lead on the response. It's champions of commerce. So everyone on the line tonight is impacted by the Coast Guard. Over 90% of all commerce is on the water, and our Coast Guard, and I use the word we, so I can't break old habits, but our Coast Guard regulates that. So they have impact on every single TV, every single table, everything you have in your house. It's an impact to all of us. So what we had to do is find out how we tell the story. Do we tell it about the different workforces and how the Coast Guard's always been a lead with women at sea, or the first African-American commanding officer for the U.S. Naval Forces? Or do you tell the story through the people? Do you tell it through the storylines itself? And we brought a team of 40 folks in, and this was some of the license that the Coast Guard gave us. And we led this group and said, how do we best tell the story? And 40 very biased people came in and had great opinions, but we ended up on telling the story about these 5 storylines. And there's 6 galleries here because one's an introduction, but the 5 storylines of how we're going to tell the story is the lifesavers around the globe. So that's on the deck called the safety deck. We're going to tell the story of how the Coast Guard, really from the 1800s until present, has just been a leader, not just around the United States, but around the world, and how lives are saved and how people are made safe at sea. Second gallery is when you get up one deck, we start getting into the security deck. So it's both enforcers on the sea and the law enforcement, from starting all the way back in right when Alexander Hamilton put us, the Coast Guard, the Revenue Marine, was in charge of the tariffs. It was to generate revenue for so you can get mad at us because we kind of are the first agency to start taxing the citizens of our great nation. But that's where the revenue came that really made our country and Alexander Hamilton's vision of a stable country and a wealthy country. It started with the ability of trade, but also the ability to tax it. That was the Revenue Marine. But we were in the rum wars. We've been in the drug wars. We've got these very tough missions in immigration enforcement. It's amazing where the Coast Guard is. And the best way to say it is because we're not actually in Department of Defense and we're in Department of Homeland Security. We're allowed to have law enforcement authorities, and we have all law enforcement authorities on the land in the United States. All federal authority resides with the Coast Guard when we're at sea. So Marshal's authority, Customs authority, all that authority is given to the Coast Guard, and it keeps our beautiful country safe. Also on the security deck is defenders of the nation. So the Coast Guard has fought in every single war the United States had. First naval shots of the Civil War was the revenue cutters. We've had a Congressional Medal of Honor winner on Guadalcanal. We still have 6 boats over in Iraq right now, keeping the oil platform safe and keeping people so that economy stays solvent, with 75% of their economy is from the oil platforms. The Coast Guard is over there working for the Navy in that role, keeping those oil platforms safe. and they've been doing that for 20 years. So we've been in every conflict. And then the fourth deck, we start getting to things like champions of commerce. I mentioned it's not just keeping the waterways safe, it's also make sure the ports are safe, the captain of port authority that keeps those ports safe, the security around that, and lastly, protectors of the environment. Folks don't know it, but everything in navigable waters that's pollution is not the EPA. The Coast Guard has lead on that. And in addition to that, the living marine resources, we work with fisheries. We're their law enforcement, their enforcement arm on maintaining, making sure people are doing proper fisheries. So you can see this large scan of missions, but it's an exciting story to tell. We're the defenders, enforcers, savers, protectors. Those are all really great words from the champions that we're going to tell the story. So this is just a great opportunity. And then within each of these stories, we're going to tell some special stories, the trailblazers out there, you know, the Ida Lewis's, who she was a civilian in the Coast Guard in the mid 1800s and was considered the bravest woman in America during the 1800s. And she was a Coast Guard civilian that just did wonderful things. Or Richard Etheridge that led the Pea Island Station, which was an African-American station in the 1870s. And they were just saving lives, and he's just a hero to our service. So it's the ability to tell the stories and then really highlight some of those beautiful trailblazer stories as well. Next slide. So the fun part is telling the stories, but the funner part is I'm going to pitch this over to Mary Catherine Wilder, who is not just working on foundation relationships, but she's been our lead working with the Coast Guard on the programming and how we engage the kids. So with that, Mary Catherine, you want to take it?
Thanks, Wes. Hi, everyone. At this point, I have the honor of presenting our vision for programming at the museum. The STEM Center is going to be located on Deck 5 or the 5th floor for those of us who don't speak in nautical terms all the time. And it'll be an incredible highlight of the museum for visitors ages 9 and up. It'll be comprised of the briefing room you see here. It'll bookend the experience, as well as 3 hands-on simulations, all actively running mission scenarios at the same time. And all of these spaces will utilize cutting edge technology to fully immerse you in the scenarios, make you feel like you are in the moment right there, in the middle of the action, making decisions as a Coast Guard service member would in that moment. So you can see here in this rendering, we have walls full of screens, the ceiling as well. It's really going to place you in that moment. And additionally, there's going to be lighting and audio components that further immerse you in that particular experience. If you keep in mind the idea of a group of 24 walking into this room, the entire group will be welcomed here, where they'll receive their instructions, advice on the challenges ahead of them, before breaking out into 3 mission groups of 8 and rotating between the 3 mission experiences that we have. Each will last about 15 minutes, and the entire set of simulations plus the briefing and debriefing will last about an hour. The overarching goals here are to work as a team, to communicate effectively, think critically, stay in the moment, remain adaptive so you can respond to situations just as quickly as they're evolving, and accomplish your mission, of course. All right, so this is the first of the 3 mission experiences. We'll go over the Command Center. So participants will enter a smaller scale replica of a command center like those found at Coast Guard bases. The situation here is that there's been an accident out in the harbor, and now as a result, there's an oil spill. The command center, the folks in the command center need to field calls, radio communications, all of this information overload, all of these inputs from people both inside the Coast Guard and out. So civilians, fishing vessels, bridge operators, the media, Coast Guard personnel themselves. They need to take all of that information that they're being brought, distill it all down, and send folks out to get the oil cleanup quickly and make sure that the ecosystem and the local wildlife are unharmed by the oil spill. During the mission experience, the team will also look at environmental factors like weather and water current to predict how the oil will spread. and they'll need to assess a variety of factors and take action to keep certain things from slowing down the environmental cleanup. So the second mission experience that we'll go over is the helicopter. So this is a search and rescue scenario. The team operating within this space is going to work together to reach the area where a boat's emergency beacon has gone off. They're going to conduct a search pattern, and they're going to work together. As you see here, you have screens on all of the walls mirroring the exactly what you'd see if you were in a helicopter looking out. So they're going to work together to look out the window, so to speak, and spot people in the water so they can initiate that rescue and work to ensure everyone's safety. They'll have to work collaboratively to problem solve. So urgent situations might arise. You can see here on the screen to the right in the mission space that the helicopter is starting to get low on fuel. So you need to figure out in this moment, okay, how long do we have left to conduct this search and rescue mission before we need to return to land? And then the third of the experiences is on board a cutter. So this is a national security mission. This space is actually really interesting because the simulation room is actually divided into two immersive sections. The first area is what you see here. This is built to simulate, to replicate a Coast Guard vessel known as a cutter, where the team will navigate to the location of a container ship suspected of harboring terrorists and determine what needs to be done to apprehend the suspects before they have a chance to do something dangerous or compromise the investigation by doing something like destroying evidence. After the team assesses the risk involved here, they'll board the ship, and then the second part of the room, which you can kind of see on the left-hand side, will light up to simulate the interior of the other ship, where the team will interview the suspected crew members and conduct a detailed search for smuggled items and weapons to determine whether the tip they received about the ship was correct. Once the teams have all rotated through the missions, they'll gather again in the debriefing room where they'll learn that the challenges they just faced, the missions they just took on are based on real life missions, and they'll watch footage of those actual missions to see how everything unfolded. Additionally, COSIs will share their experiences from being in those scenarios, and it'll be a really interesting way to tie a nice bow around the entire thing. I would like to note that while there are various outcomes for these scenarios based on the decisions that people make as a team in the moment, that there's not going to be a scenario where someone fails the mission. There are varying degrees of success, of course, but no mission failure. We did this very intentionally because we like to encourage the growth of the skills that we challenge during these missions instead of having people leave feeling discouraged. So the simulations will run a couple of times a day, and it'll also serve as the culminating experience of field trips. So we're working with experts in education to develop these K-12 in-school curriculum that aligns with age-appropriate learning goals across STEM subjects. These lessons will be plug and play, so we're not adding any additional burden to educators' plates. And the goal here is to excite kids about learning various concepts and demonstrate the kind of actions they'll be able to accomplish in real life by knowing this kind of information. So as part of the field trip, they'll also participate in what we are calling the Heroes program, where they'll engage with interactive activities and checkpoints throughout the exhibits. So think like code breaking, navigation, equipment repair, signaling, things like that. And they'll earn sections of their Coast Guard story, like sections of a comic book, essentially. And after going through all the exhibits and completing their checkpoints, they'll have a full graphic novel that's unique to the checkpoints that they chose to take on themselves. And this story will tell the story of their Coast Guard journey throughout the museum. So the field trip component will reinforce the in-class learning, as both the Heroes program and the simulated mission experiences all very discreetly ask you to utilize STEM concepts and principles, like while you're trying to set the speed and the direction of your ship, during navigation, or when you're trying to figure out how much time you have left before you run out of fuel in the helicopter. So very subtly reinforcing what you're learning in the classroom at the museum. So for our youngest learners, we also have this space, the Innovation Lab for early learners. So this will be for an age range of about 3 to 9. And we really wanted to design an approachable and age-appropriate space where kids could learn engineering principles even at this early of an age and innovate through craft and play. So we'll have different activities for different stages of development. So this space will be just as fun and educational, excuse me, for a 3-year-old as it will an 8-year-old, and whether they've learned to read yet or not. There are a couple of components to this space that I think will be very, very interesting. We have a few tables here. One will be a skills table where kids can learn to do things like tie knots. And then there's also going to be an innovation table where kids can use materials from the material wall that you see on the right to do things like innovate and develop their own life jacket, or develop their own oil spill cleanup system. And they'll be able to do that through trial and error. On top of those two spaces, you can see that there's a lot of open area for kids to run around in, shake off some of that extra energy maybe. And then we'll also have some sort of some interactive, playful components, like behind the boat that you see on the wall. On the right, there will actually be a slide that runs behind it. And then on the left here, you see sort of a tunnel going through the wall. So it's a very bright and playful space that will allow folks to really challenge themselves and become comfortable with these sometimes intimidating concepts at a very, very early age. All right. At this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Captain Pulver to talk about our progress to date.
Yeah, and I just have to make, before I did, I showed my granddaughter, 6 years old, I showed her that innovation center, and she asked me if she can go play in there now. So it kind of got me charged up. And then I said, well, it's not open for 2 years. And she said, well, that's forever from now. And so that's a new term, but just to the group, this is not forever from now. It's we're just really excited about, we've already started construction, as mentioned. We're going out to bid. The Coast Guard is already starting to let the designs to build out. You know, the helicopter itself is being worked at the aviation center so they can put the helo. So all these things are happening so we can be open in 2026, and we're fighting real hard to be open in 2026. So I couldn't explain to my granddaughter that 2 years is not forever. But to us, we're on a tight timeline, but we're excited about where we are. And part of the reason we're so excited is because of all the fundraising progress and all the progress we've had on the project. This $150 million project that we're working That's the capital side of it, not including all the work the Coast Guard's doing, the stuff that Mary Catherine's talking about within the programming, which is being done separate. So, but that building, getting the helicopter in there, creating the land, some of the land we had to create, some of the things that we're doing, $150 million total capital project. Again, as mentioned, we've identified over 100, almost 146 million of that right now. So we are, so Craig is here to talk more detail on it, but we're crushing it, and we're thrilled where we are, but we still have a ways to go. So your civic support, the support we get from organizations like yours, is why we're going to get there. Some of the ways that we've raised money, and just interesting, is the federal government has been very supportive, the state government, industry, and individuals like our chair and her family, who are lead gift to the project. It's just been extraordinary across 6,000 donors, the state of Connecticut, the federal government. And the federal government, in addition, outside of our project, is paying for all the exhibitry. They paid for an expansion of a local parking garage. The federal government put money, and they actually paid for improvements to the pier right alongside the museum. So the Coast Guard Bark Eagle, America's tall ship, the Coast Guard training vessel since 1946, that vessel is going to be moored as a tall ship, America's only Class A tall ship that's operational right now. It's going to be moored at the museum half the year. So it's just going to be extraordinary, not just a building, a platform, a campus. We have things we haven't shown you yet as an event center. So when GFWC does your yearly meeting, we hope you have one at our event center. So you come up and do a conference there, a theater for 180 seats. And then, of course, all the STEM stuff that Mary Catherine talked about, all the storylines, this beautiful atrium. And then if you look carefully in this atrium, right there at the entrance to the right is the doors. Actually, the atrium is sort of a non-tempered space. It's sort of supposed to feel like you're outside. We open the doors up, there's air flowing through, and the winter will be cold and the summer will be warm. But the doors of the museum is just to the right. But if you look straight ahead in that atrium, that's our wall of philanthropy. The Coast Guard's been very understanding that we've got to recognize our donors. And so we're just so excited about our wall of philanthropy. That wall itself not just recognizes individuals over 50,000, but we recognize campaigns as well. So as we talk to GFWC and folks want to buy a paver, and that's awesome. And if someone wants to be in the wall of philanthropy, that's dear to us. But in addition to that, we intend to do a cumulative of GFWC. So if you come together and raise $250,000, you're now in the Ida Lewis giving circle. And that'll be on that wall. So not just as individuals or if a chapter gives, but GFWC, we can raise visibility of the GFWC, and which we think would be great for partnership with the Coast Guard and our association. But we can do that in this wall of philanthropy, and we're just excited about that opportunity. And then in the museum itself, you might choose to, put that towards an exhibit. Maybe it's the exhibits on the spars, the World War II, the women who served in our United States Coast Guard, and we've had women in service since that time. Maybe that's an exhibit that you want to sponsor with that money as well. So we're just excited about the opportunities. We have the pavers, which is obviously a much lower individual point of anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000 for paver. But we've got a lot of opportunities if you want to get involved and really, in addition to being your civic priority, but personally invest in the project. We'd be thrilled to do that too. And I asked Craig Schroeder to join us on this call in case you had questions or if he wants to add anything. But we just think we've got a great opportunity to both partner with you, but also recognize you well in the museum and around your values and around your commitment. So we're just thrilled about this opportunity. Craig, anything to add there?
Wes, I think you did a great job covering kind of where we're at and, our remaining gap here that we have. Less than $5 million. $5 million can certainly sound like a lot to an individual, but as Wes said, when a collective comes together, it can really move the needle for us. We have an existing program called our Plank Owner Program, which are regular monthly donors. They give as little, as $5 a month. And that group cumulatively adds up to, just over $2 million for us every single year. So gifts of all size really matter to us, and especially when we're this close to closing out this campaign. And what we want to do, obviously, is deliver our building to the Coast Guard on time and on budget. And so the sooner we can reach our goal, the better we can deliver our end of the promise to the Coast Guard.
And then one of the things we wanted to do is just offer to answer any questions that you might have, answer questions that came online. Madam Chair, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything at the backside of our presentation here.
I'd just like to, that was a great presentation by the team here. So thank you all. Just wanted to add too, just the emphasis on, and I can speak personally to that for the time I had in the Coast Guard, but that the Coast Guard, first of all, this museum is going to be our #1 recruiting tool. And I'm sure you're all aware that all the services right now are having a difficult time in meeting their recruitment goals. We really feel like the building that we're going to deliver, the museum we're going to deliver, is going to finally be a platform for the Coast Guard to tell its story. And an important part of that story is women in service. It is the only service right now that women can serve in every rate and every job and have every opportunity that a man has. We see that with Admiral Fagan, who is our current commandant and the first service chief, female service chief in our country's history. So I just wanted to emphasize that piece to this group in particular, that the Coast Guard only gets stronger with more women serving, and we have our academy class. The Coast Guard Academy has over 40% women in attendance there now, which is by far way ahead of the other service academies. So the future for women in the Coast Guard is so bright, and that's a personal goal of mine, is to continue to shine light on that, and that's something this museum will do.
Well, we certainly thank you, Ms. Curtin, for your staying with us on tonight and doing that. But I would certainly be remiss if I wasn't able to share a little bit of the bios of the experts that we heard from before we were able to see the slideshow. So Captain Pulver, he joined the National Coast Guard Museum in 2015 after 28 years of distinguished service to the U.S. Coast Guard. He was stationed around the world with missions in 42 countries. And his final tours were as Coast Guard Chief of Congressional Affairs from December 2010 to June 2012, and aboard the U.S. Coast Guard Barak Eagle, America's tall ship, as commanding officer from 2012 to 2015. He and his wife, Lorna, have 2 sons, and in recent years, Captain Pulver has excitedly embraced his newest title of Grampy, given to him by his 3 loving grandchildren, and how fabulous it is to have the legacy to leave to them with this wonderful museum. And I know your grandkids are excited, as mine would be too, because my littles certainly love to hear about this kind of history. And also the other expert that walked us through each of the different screens that showed us all of the STEM programs that will be available, Mary Catherine Wilder. She is the foundation's relations manager, and she joined the association in 2022 as their foundation relations manager. And you can tell she knows what's going on, because she has worked with grant makers who share the vision for the National Coast Guard Museum as an exceptional and free cultural and education resource alongside its leading edge from kindergarten through 12th grade educational programs. She is originally from Georgia, and Mary Catherine graduated from Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. She probably wishes she was down south today with all the weather that they're having. She brings a background in financial services, higher education, and expert learning. In her downtime, she volunteers to provide advanced critical care for neonatal kittens and participates in waterway cleanups. I think you need to find a club, Mary Catherine, and join us here in GFWC. So with that, I know that there are some questions that are available to be asked in the chat. So if you have any questions, if you'll do that or put them in the question and answer, I know that we have Jolie is monitoring that. And Mary Catherine, whenever you're ready, I know that we do have some questions at the end for a poll for people that actually maybe would want more information. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're joining us, we will have this link available to you at the end of this presentation. So again, Ms. Curtin and Captain Pulver, Mary Catherine, and Craig, who is the Director of Development, we thank you for joining us tonight. So any of our participants would like to put a question or ask anything in the chat, and then President Stronowski will go ahead and talk to us a little bit as we close out our webinar tonight.
Mary Catherine, do you want to run the first of the 3 poll questions now? Yes?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. You have They're slowly coming in.
And Jolie, while the poll is being aggregated here, allow me to just serve up a couple of softball questions to the team here that we have. Mary Catherine, in particular, I know while we were learning about the GFWC, we learned that health and wellness, one of the priorities of this organization. Can you talk a little bit about how we envision this museum positively impacting the wellness of veterans, specifically around their mental wellness?
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, this museum and this effort to construct the museum and certainly to deliver its programming has a very easy fit with a lot of your priority areas. But the one that stands out to me is probably being the less obvious one is health and wellness. But from some research that I've done recently, I found that there's a very significant relationship between public recognition of military service and veterans' mental health. So, for example, veterans who received public recognition for their service reported higher levels of self-esteem, sense of purpose and identity, and overall well-being. Let's see, I'm looking at some statistics here, some research that was done and published in various academic journals. I'm also seeing that veterans who received recognition for their service exhibited better resilience and adaptive coping skills, and reported that appreciation of their military service positively influenced their reintegration into civilian life and their overall well-being during that transition process. And lastly, I'll say that when there is that public recognition of military service, veterans perceive less stigma around their military service. And that recognition plays a crucial role in them being more likely to seek and receive mental health care. So public recognition really does reduce barriers to them seeking mental health support, and it positively affects their well-being overall. So in a really wonderful variety of ways, this would contribute to the health and well-being of Coast Guard veterans in particular. And as was shared during the some of the advertisements of this event, you may have seen that the Coast Guard is the last branch of the military to build one of these national museums. And so bringing this level of public recognition and appreciation to the forefront for these veterans will make a big difference in their mental health and well-being.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary Catherine. Do have one question in here from Annette about the cost of the bricks and pavers. So there's actually two different levels. There is one that is 4x8 at the $1,000 mark, and then there is a larger scale one, 8x8, which is $1,790 in again recognition of the Coast Guard's founding year. Looking at the poll here, awesome to see 93% of our participants have had someone or themselves serve in the military, which is fantastic. And I'll use that, Wes, I'll throw a question your way. Can you talk a little bit about how the Coast Guard interacts with other branches of the military, both historically and current day?
Actually, that's an interesting, that's a pretty broad answer on this. So the Coast Guard has always, because as our nation developed, our U.S. Navy actually didn't exist for a few years, and yet we had these maritime conflicts. So that's what established that precedent for the Revenue Marine and the future predecessor of the Coast Guard to go ahead and serve in combat roles. So we've never lost that mission. So from a defense aspect, what we do is we can chop into the services or we can chop under the services. So as an example, when I was in the Adriatic during the Bosnia-Herzegovina on a Coast Guard cutter, we were working for a carrier group. Or interestingly, when there was 37,000 Cubans in the water in 1994, the Navy actually and the Marines chopped in underneath the Coast Guard. So we have this interoperability with these other services. But what makes the Coast Guard pretty interesting here is yet the Coast Guard also talks, Department of Homeland Security, CBP, Customs, Border Enforcement. immigration. So the Coast Guard does that too. And then obviously in like hurricane response with FEMA. So what happens is the Coast Guard actually ends up being sort of an interpreter between both Homeland Security and DoD, because we speak two languages. And so it was kind of interesting that we would go back and forth, and on one patrol, I might chop underneath a DoD entity, and then halfway through it, I might be working on a hurricane response with folks with FEMA and USAID and all the rest. So it's really interesting how the Coast Guard has to speak languages, but that interoperability is one of the secrets. We call it some of the secret sauce the Coast Guard offers to our country, because we kind of go across the lines. And I'm happy as a taxpayer that the Coast Guard's there, because we need all those agencies to come together at different times, and we speak the language of both big groups of agencies, from defense to Homeland Security to environmental to response. So yeah, sort of an interpreter among all of them.
Looking at the chat, Jenna, Coast Guard loves Miami as well. Very obviously a big presence down there. But again, Wes, I'll ask you. I think we have 37 states represented on the call here today. Maybe make the Coast Guard a little more tangible for those who are more inland. The folks who don't, have a border with the ocean, or may not think the Coast Guard has a major impact on their day-to-day lives, whether it's through our Champions of Commerce mission or anything like that. How are the average citizen being touched by the Coast Guard in their day-to-day life?
So obviously the Coast Guard coastal is an important factor. So a lot of our resources are large deep water vessels, a lot of air stations, they're centered around the coast for search and rescue in that response. But what's very interesting about the service is the inland rivers are all regulated by the Coast Guard. Not only the navigational buoys and the setups that make sure navigation, but there's a lot of chemicals that go across those rivers. The Coast Guard regulates all of that, and they're very active. And then as examples, we have a lot of unfortunate flooding at this time of year on the rivers. It's the Coast Guard that's actually responsible for getting the rivers back up and keeping commerce flowing. So the Coast Guard just kind of a jack of all trades, but because of that, we're in just about every state in the country. In some places you wouldn't expect us to be. But the reason for it is commerce is a critical element of our nation. And that's something, the regulation of commerce is in any navigable waters is actually the responsibility of the Coast Guard. And it's really interesting. Like Oklahoma has a lake that is half in Oklahoma, half in Texas. Therefore, it's a federal lake, and the Coast Guard's there. Up in Burlington, Vermont, we had a station up there in the summer because it crosses state boundaries. So the Coast Guard's in a lot of spaces you wouldn't expect. And it's amazing because I worked on Capitol Hill, so I was also very aware of 50 states, because that's how the Congress is set up. And I found out, and I didn't even know it myself, of how much impact the Coast Guard has in these inland waters, how much rescues it does around the country, what it does to keep the waterways open, when the flooding occurs, how EPA and the Coast Guard work together, because the flooding is actually a navigable river, which is a Coast Guard priority, not an EPA, but we work together on it. It's extraordinary where the Coast Guard is. And then, as mentioned in my bio, not just the United States, but around the world. I was in 42 countries with the Coast Guard. I didn't really sign up for that because I didn't know, but boy, that was fun. So the Coast Guard's really everywhere. It's pretty neat stuff.
One of the things I really enjoyed about this position is learning. I had very little exposure to the Coast Guard prior to joining this team. It's been kind of drinking through a fire hose while I joined the team here, but even learned something new tonight. And I'm going to just read this real quickly so I get it right. But I guess there is some crossover between the Coast Guard and the GFWC, in which they had club women serving in the Coast Guard during World War II as uniformed clerical workers at Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. So, to Wes's earlier point, right, in your day-to-day life, you're being touched by the Coast Guard, but also real through lines to the organization and to our organization as well. Sharon, Jolie, you let me know. Deb, let me know if we're running up against time here. We're obviously very passionate about this project, and we could talk about it, all night.
Let's go ahead and run the next two poll questions so we have those answers live, if you wouldn't mind. Everyone can go ahead and answer.
Sue, allow me to direct this next question to you. I know, in your personal service, you did some of the environmental work that the Coast Guard does. And in meetings I've had with you, you talk about how really the Coast Guard is one of the first like humanitarian organizations out there, and sort of, focusing on different areas that might resonate a lot with the current youth and people who are, focused on that right now in their current lives. Can you share a little bit about, maybe your own personal experiences or things that the Coast Guard is doing in those areas right now?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, from personal experience, I enlisted in 1991, and for all those military families out there, I like to remind Wes that it took the enlisted ranks to get this museum off the ground. But when I enlisted, that was right after.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes. At that time, 1990 was right after the Exxon Valdez disaster, and Congress passed the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. And when I joined the Coast Guard, a new rate had been formed called Port Security. And at that time, we really were environmental police officers. I like to tell my kids that I was way ahead of their generation when it came to worrying about the environment. And we would go up and down the coastline investigating and responding to any types of oil spills or environmental hazards in the waterways. So you think back, that was 91 to 95 during that time that I was serving. And, again, another piece of what the Coast Guard does day in and day out that the average citizen really doesn't know about. And all while, the size of the Coast Guard active duty force is the size of the New York City Police Department. You think about that, the power of such a small organization conducting, so many missions beyond the other services. It's really quite powerful of a story to be told. So why we're excited to be a part of this.
Love to see that so many of you are excited for the interactive exhibits. I think it's one of the unique parts of building a museum in 2024 is our ability to include some of those virtual reality experiences, that new technology. Our museum is certainly going to be so much more than just, old uniforms behind glass that you kind of walk through quietly and things like that. So there is going to be a lot of interactive options and opportunities. And as we showed in the renderings earlier today, especially for our younger visitors, which we've done some studies, and there is certainly a large population around the New London area that have children, and we think it's going to be a great opportunity to engage them at a level that they're really interested in. Do we have one more poll, I believe?
Yes.
Yes, the one that I'm most interested in seeing the results too, as the fundraiser. While we gather these results, Wes, can you share a little bit of the backstory? I've always found it interesting for how the museum ended up in New London. I know there was, long debates about New York City, New London. Where is it going to go? Share a little bit about that history.
So I've chatted with a few folks at GFWC. I worked on Capitol Hill, and a little bit of a political junkie. It was a political decision. The nation didn't have a National Coast Guard Museum. A few decades ago, it really came to light when the Coast Guard wanted to start pursuing it, and well before our associate was involved, and well before Sue and I. But so what happened is they were pursuing this. We want to put a museum, and it became a political hot potato. And I kind of sum it up with, at the time in history, Dodd and Lieberman are more powerful than Schumer and Clinton. And so, and John McCain, who lived at Subbase New London as a kid, was the vote that put it over. And that's how it got to New London. Now, having said that, it would have been really neat. I'm sure Craig wouldn't have minded being 100 yards from Wall Street to fundraise. It might have been an interesting, a little different than fundraising in New London, Connecticut. But the Coast Guard is known for small towns. It's known for Coast Guard cities, which New London, Connecticut is one. So this kind of an exciting opportunity, whereas the other museums are around DC, or they're in Akron, Ohio, which is like 10 times the population where we are. It also made us actually design the museum differently. it's less about the me's of the world, and it's more about kids and bringing in families, and more than it's telling the story. It's not just making someone like me go back and see my own story. So we had to broaden so I think it was kind of neat having a small town, but it was going back to why it's in New London. It was a hot potato. I think it's in the right location, small town, Coast Guard city, the history, one of the 10 original cutters. Arnold Palmer became Petty Officer Arnold Palmer here at the Yeomanry School, and we ran the rum wars out of New London, Connecticut. So it's really got a lot of history too.
Also, Wes, I'd also add to that. You know, we also use the National World War II Museum that's down in New Orleans as a case study.
Sure.
That started off as a very small, tiny regional Higgins boat museum, and through some great leadership, turned into a massive campus and complex. They just opened up their third wing of this museum that takes about 3 days to get through. And that museum, you know, proved to us that people will come to an area just to partake in a national museum. And it had transformed a section of New Orleans. It's I don't know if this is still correct, but at one point it was the second most visited museum in the country. And we're hoping that our National Coast Guard Museum, you know, one day can rank right up there, and being just down the road, not far from Mystic, Connecticut, Mystic Seaport, which is a very big tourist destination in the summertime. We know we have something that is going to transform the area, as well as tell the Coast Guard story.
You know.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was shared already previously or not, but we have done some studies in there. It does show about a $10 million impact annually in tourism dollars being brought into New London as a result of this project. And so, you know, when you think about what would $10 million mean to New York City, not much, but what would it mean to a city like New London? Transformational, right? And it's going to bring, you know, 300,000 people through the doors every year as well. So lots of attention and a big impact on a small city that needs it. And I think we'll certainly, you know, really feel the difference of the museum once it's open. Love to see the responses on this poll as well. You know, time, talent, and treasure. Those are the 3 T's of philanthropy, and we really want to engage you, you know, on all 3 levels. So I will make myself available to anybody on this call who is interested in having a conversation about either making their own gift or somehow, you know, getting involved and spreading the word. We are a national museum, and so we want to, you know, make sure that we are known throughout the country as well. So any way that you can spread the word about this project, we would certainly appreciate that. And again, any sort of donation that you can provide to get us over the finish line here, we would certainly appreciate that as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to our gracious hosts and just say thank you for attending and being such great participants here tonight.
Well, I have to thank each and every one of you. You were amazing, and I could just see all the comments that are coming in. Impressive. That tonight's webinar was impressive, informative, and you hit it right on the mark. And thank you, each of you, for to show your passion to all of us in regards to the museum. I do want to remind our members that the video will be available on our GFWC YouTube channel. And it's time for all the thank yous as the screen that's just come up. I'd like to take this moment and thank again our panelists, Susan, Wes, Mary Kathleen, and Greg. And I also would like to just say a shout out to thank a club member, Jennifer Hawkins, who brought this initiative to me when I was at the GFWC Florida convention last spring. So thank you, Jennifer. I'm seeing it is indeed engaging to the members who are on this webinar this evening. I'd also like to thank Sharon again for being our moderator of the evening, our GFWC Civic Engagement and Outreach Chairman, and of course, our second Vice President, Jolie Frankfurt, and our events manager, Nishu Reina, for being behind the scenes to make sure our webinar was a success this evening. So thank you again. And thank you, members, for being a part of this evening and being with us to learn more about the National Coast Guard Museum, how GFWC can support this once in a lifetime effort. So I think we've got some engagement here. I appreciate all of you being on here. Have a great evening. And I'd like to do one commercial. Our next webinar will be on, I believe, February 20th. And it's the Power of Projects. And we will be featuring our community service program chairmen, such as Sharon and the other 5. So please, if you haven't signed up for that webinar, please do so. And we look forward to seeing you on February 20th at 7 p.m. And thank you again, all of you on here and our wonderful members. Have a great evening. Take care.
So much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.